It's 6:30 in the morning and the tide is out. A man is sitting against the seawall at Somerton Park beach, head back, legs straight, ankles crossed. He looks like he fell asleep there. He has been dead for about 4 hours. There's a half-smoked cigarette resting on the right collar of his coat, not in his mouth, not on the sand, balanced on his collar, as if someone put it there, or as if it fell from his lips and simply stopped. Months later, a detective will find a hidden pocket sewn into his trousers. Rolled up inside is a torn scrap of paper with 2 words printed on it in Persian: Tamam Shud. It is finished. If you value deep dive investigative crime documentaries, please like, subscribe, and turn on all notifications to support independent reporting. Somerton Park sits about 11 kilometers southwest of Adelaide on the coast. In 1948, it's a quiet stretch. Bathing boxes, a seawall, a children's home across the road. Nothing happens here. He's lying across from the crippled children's home, on the corner of the Esplanade and Bickford Terrace. A couple out walking spot him and call the police. That's how it starts. A phone call about a man asleep on a beach. Here's the position, and it matters later. He's on his back, head resting against the seawall, legs extended, feet crossed at the ankle, relaxed, arranged almost. Witnesses will argue about that word for the next 70 years. They go through his pockets. An unused second-class rail ticket, Adelaide to Henley Beach. A bus ticket that may never have been used. A narrow aluminium comb made in America. Half a packet of juicy fruit, and an Army Club cigarette packet, except the 7 cigarettes inside it aren't Army Club, they're Kensitas, a different brand. Somebody had been putting one brand of cigarette into another brand's packet, and now the part that turns a dead man into a case. No wallet, no hat, which in 1948 is genuinely strange, and no identification of any kind. Not one document with a name on it. The advertiser runs it the next morning, page 3, a few lines long, body found on beach. They even print a name, E.C. Johnson of Arthur Street, Payneham. They have the wrong man. The day after that story runs, E.C. Johnson walks into a police station in Adelaide and introduces himself. He is not dead. He is the first of many people who will be confidently identified as this man and then turn out to be alive. Back up 12 hours. On the evening of the 30th, several people see a man lying in that exact spot. A couple passing at around 7 say they watched him raise his right arm to full stretch and then let it drop. Another couple watch him from 7:30 until 8. The streetlights come on. He never moves. They notice he isn't reacting to the mosquitoes and they remark on it to each other, and then they decide he's drunk and they walk on. One of those witnesses tells police something else. She saw a man standing at the top of the steps down to the beach, looking down at the sleeping man. She could not describe his face. It was too dark. 11 years later, in 1959, a witness comes forward with a different account. He says he and 3 others saw a well-dressed man carrying another man over his shoulders along that beach the night before the body was found. The pathologist puts him at about 40 to 45 and in, quote, top physical condition, 180 centimeters, gray eyes, fair to ginger hair going gray at the temples, broad shoulders, narrow waist. His hands and nails show no sign of manual labor, but his feet are odd. The big and little toes meet in a wedge, and his calf muscles are unusually high and pronounced. The kind of legs you get from years in high-heeled boots, or from ballet. He's well-dressed, white shirt, a red, white, and blue tie, brown trousers, a knitted pullover, and a gray and brown double-breasted jacket cut in what the police describe as an American style, and every single label has been cut out. He's clean-shaven. He carries nothing that names him, and he has no hat, which sounds trivial until you look at a photograph of any Australian street in 1948 and count how many men are bareheaded. Almost none. Police take his dental records and circulate them in 1948. That is one of the few reliable ways to put a name to a body. His teeth match nobody, not in South Australia, not anywhere they look. By the 4th of December, they have his fingerprints, and they aren't on South Australian records either. So the search widens. The prints go interstate, and then overseas. The news puts him on its front page, an actual photograph of the dead man, printed in a daily newspaper so that somebody, anybody might recognize him. It's a blunt thing to do, and it works in the worst possible way. In 1949, police take a plaster cast of his head and chest. It still exists. For 70 years, it will be the closest thing anyone has to a portrait of him, and it tells them nothing at all. And the calls start. People who lost a brother, people whose lodger never came home, people who just want the story to be about somebody. Every one of them has to be checked. In early January, 2 people look at the body and say the same name. Robert Walsh, 63, a former woodcutter. He'd left Adelaide months earlier to buy sheep in Queensland and never came back for Christmas. A third man, James Mack, comes to look. He can't identify him. An hour later, he telephones the police and says, yes, it's Walsh. He explains the delay by saying the hair color had looked wrong to him. Police are already skeptical. They think Walsh is too old. Then Elizabeth Thompson, one of the two who had been certain, goes back for a second look. A scar she expected isn't there. The legs are wrong. She withdraws her identification. By early February, there have been 8 separate positive identifications. A missing station worker, a steamship hand, a Swedish man, 2 men in Darwin who were sure it was their friend. All 8 are wrong. Detectives in Victoria think he's one of theirs because the laundry marks resemble those used by Melbourne dry cleaners. His photograph runs in Victorian papers. 28 people write in. Victoria disproves every single claim. A seaman named Tommy Reed, off a ship called the Cycle, is in port at the time and unaccounted for. His shipmates are brought to the morgue. They look at the body and say, flatly, that it isn't him. By November 1953, police announce they have received the 251st proposed solution to his identity. 251, and they say the only clue of any value is still his clothing. On the 10th of December, they embalm him. Police say it's the first time they have known such a step to be necessary. They are preserving a body because they genuinely do not know how long they will need it. The autopsy puts the time of death at around 2 in the morning on the 1st of December, which means if the witnesses were watching the same man, he lay there dying for hours while couples walked past and assumed he was drunk. The findings are strange. The heart is normal, but the liver is engorged with blood. The kidneys are congested, and the spleen is about 3 times the size it should be. Something had been happening inside him. There is blood mixed in with the food in his stomach. There is ulceration in his gullet, and acute congestion running the length of his digestive tract. This is not a man who died peacefully in his sleep. His last meal was a pasty, eaten 3 to 4 hours before he died. Investigators look hard at that pasty. It is not believed to be the source of anything, so they test him for poison. And here's the problem that keeps this case alive for 70 years. The tests find nothing. No foreign substance in the body at all. The pathologist, John Dwyer, does not hedge. He states, quote, I am quite convinced the death could not have been natural. And then he says what he thinks did it, a barbiturate or a soluble hypnotic. An inquest opens within days, and then stalls. The coroner, Thomas Erskine Cleland, adjourns it until the 17th of June, 6 months, to try to find out who the dead man is. It doesn't work. Cleland re-examines the body himself, and he notices the shoes. They're remarkably clean, recently polished, which is not what you expect from a man who has supposedly spent an entire day wandering around Glenelg. So Cleland raises a possibility that the man died somewhere else and was brought to the beach afterwards. It would explain the clean shoes. It would also explain something the autopsy could not. Poisoning has 2 obvious physical signs, vomiting and convulsions. At the scene, there was evidence of neither. Not on his clothes, not on the sand, not anywhere around him. But Cleland is careful and he says so. It's speculation, because every witness insisted it was definitely the same person. Same spot, same distinctive position. The man they watched not moving was the man found dead. Then the inquest hears from Cedric Stanton Hicks, professor of physiology and pharmacology at the University of Adelaide, and his testimony is the reason people still argue about this case today. Hicks describes a group of drugs. He won't name them out loud. He calls them number 1 and number 2, and he says number 2 in particular is extremely toxic in a small oral dose and extremely difficult to detect, possibly impossible. He writes the 2 names on a piece of paper and hands it to the coroner. It's entered into the record as Exhibit C.18. The names are not read out, and they are not released to the public. The reason for the secrecy is uncomfortable and practical. In 1949, both drugs are, in the court's words, quite easily procurable by the ordinary individual, from a chemist, without having to give a reason. The names finally become public in the 1980s. Digitalis and Owabane, both cardiac glycosides, both capable of stopping a heart and leaving very little behind for a 1948 laboratory to find. But Hicks flags a problem with his own theory. The one thing missing from the body is evidence of vomiting. He says its absence isn't unheard of. He also says that without it, he cannot reach a frank conclusion. And then he does the arithmetic out loud. If the man died around 7 hours after he was last seen to move, then the dose would have had to be enormous. Enormous and still undetectable, which leaves one very unpleasant possibility on the record. that the movement the couple saw at 7 in the evening, the arm raised to full stretch and then dropped, was not a man shifting in his sleep. It was the last convulsion. Cleland's finding is one of the strangest sentences in Australian legal history. He says he would be prepared to find that the man died from poison, that the poison was probably a glucoside, and that it was not accidentally administered. Not accidentally administered, which means either he took it deliberately or somebody gave it to him. And the coroner cannot say which, cannot say who he was, and cannot close the file. And then, 6 weeks after the body is found, the case cracks open from an entirely different direction. Staff at Adelaide railway station open a brown suitcase that nobody has come back for. The records show when it was checked in, after 11 in the morning on the 30th of November, the day before he died, and the label that should say who owns it has been removed. Inside is an ordinary life, packed neatly, a red checked dressing gown, a pair of red felt slippers, size 7, 4 pairs of underpants, pajamas, shaving things. There's a light brown pair of trousers in there with sand still in the cuffs, which is either the most ordinary detail in the case or evidence that he had already been down to a beach before the day he died. And then the contents stop being ordinary. An electrician's screwdriver, a table knife that has been cut down into a short, sharp instrument, a pair of scissors with the points sharpened, and a small square of zinc, apparently a sheath for both. There's also a stenciling brush, the kind used by third officers on merchant ships to mark cargo. It is, for a while, the single most promising object in the entire case. It leads nowhere. And a card of orange wax thread. Barber brand, an unusual type, and not sold in Australia. Police then check the trousers the dead man was wearing on the beach. A pocket lining has been repaired, with the same thread. So the suitcase is his. That is now beyond argument, which means everything in it was chosen by him, and everything missing from it was removed by somebody, almost certainly by him. Every identification mark on the clothing in that suitcase has been taken off, same as the clothes he died in. Somebody sat down and methodically unpicked his own name out of his own wardrobe. Except on 3 items. A tie says T. Keane, a laundry bag says Keane, a singlet says Keane with no E. 3 names on 3 objects in a suitcase where every other name has been destroyed. Police reach a conclusion about that, and it is a cold one. They believe whoever stripped the labels either missed those 3 or left them on purpose because they knew Keane was not the dead man's name. They search for a missing T. Keane, not just in Australia. In every English-speaking country they can reach, there is no missing T. Keane anywhere. There are also 3 dry cleaning marks on the clothes. 1171/7, 4393/7, 3053/7, circulated nationwide, matched to nothing. One more thing about the suitcase. A coat inside it has a front gusset and feather stitching that indicate American manufacture, and it had not been imported. So either he had been to America or he got it from somebody who had. And here's what the suitcase did not contain. No spare socks, no letters, no documents, no photographs. He packed pencils and blank writing paper and not one single piece of correspondence. So that's where it sits. A body nobody can name, a suitcase that confirms nothing, and a coroner who can't close the file. And then somebody goes back through the clothes one more time and finds a pocket. It's a fob pocket, a small watch pocket sewn into the waistband of his trousers. It had been missed, and rolled up tightly inside it is a scrap of paper about the size of a postage stamp. Unrolled, it carries 2 words. Printed, not handwritten, torn from a book, and the words are Persian. Tamam Shud, which translates as, "It is ended," or "It is finished." Those 2 words are the last line of a poem collection called the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. And the theme of the Rubaiyat is, roughly, that you should live fully and have no regrets when it ends, which police notice immediately. So police make an appeal. Somewhere out there is a copy of the Rubaiyat with its final page torn. They ask the public to find it, and astonishingly, the public does. A man comes forward with it, and here the case does something odd. His name is never released. Detective Sergeant Lionel Lean, who led the investigation, routinely protected witnesses by giving them false names in public. Lean called him Ronald Francis. That was not his name, and to this day he has never been officially identified. A central witness in Australia's most famous unsolved case is himself anonymous. He'd found the book in a car, an open-roof car, parked on Jetty Road in Glenelg. Some accounts put it in the rear floor well. Others say the back seat. Somebody had simply thrown it in through the open roof, and nobody can agree on when. One newspaper account says the book turned up a week or two before the body was found. The detective who later worked the cold case, Jerry Feltus, records it as just after. That gap matters more than it sounds. Because if the book was thrown into that car a fortnight early, then the man was in Adelaide long before the day the suitcase says he arrived. And everything about his last day changes. The book is missing the words Tamam Shud from its last page, and the reverse of that page is blank. Microscopic tests confirm it. The scrap in his hidden pocket was torn from this exact copy, and then detectives turned to the inside back cover. There's nothing written on it, but there are indentations, pressure marks left behind by somebody writing on a sheet that rested on top of it. Three things come up under the light: a local telephone number, a second number nobody has ever identified, and a block of capital letters that looks, to everyone who sees it, like a coded message. 5 lines of capital letters, one of them struck out. No spaces that make sense, no obvious pattern. It has been photographed, printed, and stared at by more people than almost any other document in Australian criminal history. Code experts are called in at the time. They get nowhere. Amateurs take it up, and keep taking it up, for decades. Nobody produces a solution that satisfies the people who actually hold the file. In 1978, at the request of an ABC journalist named Stuart Littlemore, Department of Defense cryptographers take a proper look at it. Their answer is not a decryption, it's a shrug, written formally. They report that it would be impossible to give a satisfactory answer. If it is an encrypted message, it is far too short. There are, in their words, insufficient symbols to extract a clear meaning. And then they add a second possibility, and it's the one people tend not to quote, that the text may not be a code at all, that it could be the meaningless product of a disturbed mind. In 2004, the retired detective Jerry Feltus offers a reading of the final line. Those 13 letters, he suggests, could be initials. It's time to move to South Australia, Moseley Street. Moseley Street is the main road through Glenelg. It is also where a particular woman lived, and that is not a coincidence Feltus invented, because her telephone number was in the back of that same book. Between 2009 and 2011, a University of Adelaide team led by Derek Abbott works the code again. They conclude the most likely explanation is that each letter is the first letter of a word. In 2014, a computational linguist, John Railing, tests that idea properly. He finds the letter pattern does strongly resemble the initials of English text, and then he searches a large body of literature for a match, and finds none. His conclusion is deflating and probably correct. The letters were most likely written as a private shorthand, not as a code, and because it's shorthand, the text behind it can probably never be recovered. Which brings us back to the one thing in the back of that book that was never mysterious at all: a telephone number, a real, local, working Adelaide telephone number. It belongs to a nurse, Jessica Ellen Thompson, known as Jo, born Jessie Harkness in the Sydney suburb of Marrickville, and she lives on Moseley Street, Glenelg. Now measure the distance. Her house on Moseley Street sits about 400 meters north of the spot on the beach where the body was found. 400 meters. A 5-minute walk. During the war, Jessica Harkness had given a copy of the Rubaiyat to a man named Alf Boxall. Police eventually tracked Boxall down. He is alive, working at a bus depot at Randwick, in Sydney, and Boxall still has his copy, complete with the words Tamam Shud still on the final page, exactly where they should be. He has no idea there is any connection between himself and a dead man on a beach in Adelaide. In the front of Boxall's copy, she'd signed herself Jestin and written out verse 70. Indeed, repentance oft before I swore. But was I sober when I swore? So a woman 400 meters from the body had once given the same book of poetry to a man she knew. Her phone number is in the copy connected to the dead man. And what any of that actually means, nobody has ever established. It's worth remembering what year this is. 1948. The Cold War has just started. A dead man with no name, no labels, an undetectable poison, and a coded note lands in exactly the right decade to become a spy story. The theory is easy to assemble and almost impossible to test. Every element of it is circumstantial. And in 77 years, no document, no archive, and no agency has ever produced anything to support it. South Australia police did not keep this local. They sent his photograph and his fingerprints to counterparts overseas. In the United States, the Federal Bureau of Investigation ran the prints. No match. In 2011, a wartime identity card surfaces issued in 1918 to an H.C. Reynolds, nationality British, age 18. For a while, it looks like the answer. It has a photograph on it. Then the archives are searched. the United States National Archives, the United Kingdom National Archives, the Australian War Memorial. None of them hold a single record for an H.C. Reynolds. The man on the card does not exist on paper. Independent researchers later argue the card belonged to a Tasmanian man, Horace Charles Reynolds, who died in 1953, which rules him out entirely. And the case stays where it has always been. Open, and then decades simply pass. Prosper Thompson dies in 1995. Jessica Thompson dies in 2007. The people who might have been able to answer a direct question are, one by one, no longer available to answer it. In October 2011, the South Australian Attorney General John Rao refuses to allow the body to be exhumed. His reasoning is blunt. There need to be public interest reasons that go well beyond public curiosity or broad scientific interest. Jerry Feltus, who worked the cold case, adds his own doubt. He is still contacted by people in Europe who believe the man is a missing relative. But he points out that in that period, plenty of people changed their names and moved countries. Then in October 2019, a different Attorney General, Vicky Chapman, grants approval. The parties who want the analysis agree to cover the costs themselves. And a plan is made to compare his DNA to that of a potential granddaughter. On the 19th of May, 2021, they open the grave at West Terrace Cemetery in Adelaide. He has been in the ground for 72 years, under a headstone that does not carry a name. Police describe the remains as being in reasonable condition and say they are optimistic about recovering DNA. They also note something unexpected. He was buried deeper than anyone had thought. The exhumation happens under two operations with names that tell you how long this has taken: Operation Persevere and Operation Persist. Both investigate historical unidentified remains in South Australia. Anne Coxon, Assistant Director of Operations at Forensic Science South Australia, puts it plainly. The technology available to us now, she says, is clearly light years ahead of the techniques available when this body was discovered. But the breakthrough does not come from the grave. It comes from something taken in 1949 and kept for 70 years. Hair embedded in the plaster cast of his head and chest. On the 26th of July, 2022, Derek Abbott of the University of Adelaide, working with the American genealogist Colleen Fitzpatrick, announces that they have a name, built from genetic genealogy out of that hair. The name is Carl Webb, Carl Charles Webb. Born on the 16th of November 1905 in Footscray, a suburb of Melbourne, the youngest of 6 children. An electrical engineer and instrument maker. His father, Richard August Webb, had emigrated to Australia from Hamburg. The family ran a bakery in Springvale, and all 3 sons worked in it. When the bakery closed, Carl retrained. He retrained as an electrical instrument maker, which is worth holding on to because of what was sitting in that suitcase at Adelaide railway station. An electrician's screwdriver, sharpened scissors. A knife cut down into a precision tool. On the 4th of October 1941, Webb married Dorothy Robertson, known as Doff, a pharmacist and chiropodist. They moved into a flat on Bromby Street, South Yarra, and by her own account, it was not a happy marriage. She described him as solitary, few friends, a quiet life, in bed by 7 every night, and also moody, violent and threatening, particularly when he was facing defeat, even over something trivial. She also said he was fond of poetry and wrote a good deal of it himself. And then she said the thing that stops you. Most of his poems were on the subject of death, which, she said, he claims to be his greatest desire. Now go back to the book. The Rubaiyat is a poem cycle about mortality and about having no regrets when it ends. A man who wrote poems about death, carrying the last line of that particular book in a hidden pocket, is not a coincidence anyone has to strain for. There is more. Dorothy said that in March 1946, her husband attempted suicide with an overdose of ether. She nursed him back to health, and he scolded her for it, and became more violent afterwards. In September 1946, she left him, alleging years of physical and verbal abuse. He moved out of the flat in 1947. And from that point, no official record has ever been found of where Carl Webb went. His family thought he'd gone to Cottesloe in Perth and then lost contact. Meanwhile, by 1951, Dorothy was living in Butte, South Australia, 144 kilometers from Adelaide, which produces the simplest explanation anyone has offered in 77 years. Abbott suggests that Carl Webb may have traveled to Adelaide for one reason, to find his wife. Dorothy applied for a divorce on the 5th of June, 1951, citing desertion. The hearing was held that October. The divorce was granted in April 1952. By then he had been in the ground, unnamed, for over 3 years. And then there's the name on the tie. Webb's eldest sister, Freda, had married into a family called Keane. Her son, John Keane, served with the Royal Australian Air Force and died in 1943. John Keane's possessions included American coins and a map of Chicago, consistent with aircrew training in Canada on the way to Britain. Keane and Webb lived a 20-minute drive apart, and a dead man in Adelaide was wearing an American-made coat with the name Keane on his tie. So lay it all out: an instrument maker which matches the tools, a man who wrote poems about death which matches the book, a wife who had moved to South Australia which explains the journey, and a nephew called Keane which explains the tie. It is coherent. For the first time in 74 years, the pieces make a shape, which is exactly why the next part matters, and why it gets left out of most retellings of this story. South Australia police have not verified the identification. Neither has Forensic Science South Australia. They said they were hopeful of being able to do so. That is not the same thing as having done it. So this is where it actually stands. A university professor and a genealogist have a name. The police file does not, and the headstone at West Terrace Cemetery still does not carry one. And even if the name is right, look at what it settles. There were always 3 questions here. Who was he? How did he die? And what was he doing on that beach? The name answers one of them. How he died is still exactly where the coroner left it in 1949. The poison was never found. The 2 drugs Hicks named were only ever a suggestion. Nothing was ever recovered from the body. And the coroner's phrasing still sits there in the file. Probably a glucoside, and not accidentally administered. Which leaves the same 2 options it left in 1949. He took it, or somebody gave it to him. And what he was doing on that beach is not answered at all. Not by the name, not by the suitcase, not by the code, which is probably not a code. A man got off a train, checked a bag, did not board the train he had a ticket for, and went to the sea. Someone cut the labels out of his clothes. On the balance of everything now known, that someone was probably him, which means he arranged deliberately for nobody to be able to name him, and then left 3 that said Keane. Either he missed them after being careful enough to unpick every other one, or he knew that a name which was not his own was the safest thing to leave behind. Here is the last day, as far as anyone can reconstruct it. He arrives at Adelaide railway station on an overnight train. He buys a ticket to Henley Beach for 10:50 in the morning. He does not use it. That unused ticket was in his pocket when they found him. He bought a way out of Adelaide, and then he checked his suitcase into the cloakroom, walked out of the station and caught a bus in the opposite direction. The bus took him to Glenelg, where a woman he may or may not have known lived on Moseley Street, 400 meters from the seawall he would be found against the following morning. And then at some point that evening, he sat down against the seawall with his legs out and his ankles crossed. And that is the last thing anybody can say about Carl Webb, or whoever he was, with any confidence at all. With 2 words rolled up in a pocket that nobody found for months, not written by him. Torn from the end of a poem, carried where it would only be discovered if somebody searched him very, very carefully. Tamam Shud, it is ended. A man who by his wife's account wrote poem after poem about death, carrying the final line of a poem about death, folded into the smallest pocket he owned. That is either a suicide note 2 words long, written by somebody who did not want to write one, or it is a scrap of paper in a pocket, and it means nothing, and we have spent 77 years reading a man's life into a piece of litter. The Somerton man case has produced 251 proposed solutions, a defense cryptography report, a plaster cast, an exhumation, and a DNA identification that the police have not signed off on. What it has not produced is a cause of death, a reason for the journey, or a single document signed by an official body that says this man was called anything at all. The beach is still there. The seawall is still there. People walk past the spot every morning without knowing it is the spot, which is probably how he would have wanted it, if wanting had anything to do with it. And somewhere behind all of it there is a man who was about 43, who was good with his hands, who read poetry, who frightened his wife, and who sat down on a beach in a city where nobody knew him. His grave is at West Terrace Cemetery, Adelaide plot P3, 12, 106. The stone does not say Carl Webb. It has never said Carl Webb. For 77 years, the file has stayed open, because opening it fully would require answers that the physical evidence simply does not contain. A name is not the same as an explanation, which leaves the 2 words he was carrying in a pocket he must have known was almost impossible to find. It is ended. And for everyone who has worked this case since 1948, that is the one claim in the whole file that has never been true. Thank you for watching. Subscribe and turn on notifications for our next deep dive investigation.